So, YouTube decided that I needed some guidance. Some of you may agree. Apparently, I have been doing things wrong. I'm an elder Gen Xer. I've been married for almost 30 years. I've had a career. Few of them, actually. I have kids, a dog, and a spine. And apparently a YouTube channel that somehow sends the wrong signals because the algorithm recently decided that I needed to watch some videos about what makes a good woman. So I did. And I laughed. I'm not sure if it was because it was funny or because it was nauseatingly absurd. Those are not always different things. So, what makes a good woman, according to the internet? Well, a good woman is soft, compliant, uncomplicated. One man, build him up. Know your role. Stay in your lane. Must have feminine essence, which in their speak means soft, sweet, apologizes a lot, needs constant reassurance, like a puppy apparently. Red flags include tattoos, a past, opinions, a voice, a career she actually cares about, any evidence at all that she was a fully formed human being before she met her significant other. One video listed chronic illness as a red flag. Another suggested that a high-quality woman mirrors her partner's beliefs, all of them, takes on his worldview, his hobbies, his politics, and that this is what makes her valuable. I am just going to let those sit there for a minute. Just call me a walking, talking red flag. Hello. Me, my daughter, my son's girlfriend. Basically every woman I know and genuinely admire. Red flags. All of us. Because we have spines and histories and things to say, and we're not particularly interested in making ourselves smaller so somebody else feels bigger. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rachel. Now, I am not trying to pick a fight here. I am just talking about what the algorithm decided to hand me. And if it's ridiculous, I'm damn well going to talk about it. If you're a man watching this isn't about you. I mean that. This isn't men versus women. It's not women are better, men are worse, or any version of that. What I actually think, and what I don't think gets said enough, is this world doesn't go anywhere without both of us. It's not philosophy, it's just biology. We're more alike than the story would have us believe. And the qualities that make a good human being don't come in a gender. They just don't. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a whole ecosystem of content out there about what makes a good man as well. I went down both rabbit holes, and some of it is genuinely good. Discipline, purpose, accountability, take care of your health, build something. Don't be ruled by your impulses. Show up. I'm sorry, but that applies to every human being who's ever drawn breath. But then there is the version for men that got popular recently. The one that took Stoicism, an ancient philosophy about inner character and virtue, and turned it into an aesthetic. Emotionless, dominant, invulnerable, hard. Nobody checked the receipts. It was a classic bait and switch. You came in for a philosophy about character and you left with a brand about toughness. Marcus Aurelius, who some of these videos love to quote, cried publicly when his friends died. He wrote privately about his own failures, his anger, his impatience, his self-doubt. He was not trying to look untouchable. He was working on himself constantly, honestly, with no audience whatsoever. I am going to argue that he would not recognize himself in some of the content made in his name these days. But there are a lot of men out there who get that. Like, I think the men who probably watch this channel, who read Marcus Aurelius and actually got the point, who understand and teach that Stoicism was never about being emotionless or dominant or impossible to reach. Those men exist, and this isn't about them. The actual Stoic definition about what makes a good person is 4 things: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. That's the complete list. No mention of physical strength or dominance. No mention of how much you can bench press, what's in your bank account, or what you do for a living. 4 qualities of character. All internal, all available to every human being, regardless of anything else about them. Which is the point that the good woman content misses entirely. because those four things don't appear once in anything I watched. Not once. What I watched were compliance checklists put out there by men and other women, and a bunch of that AI, horrible generated stuff. You know the ones, fake English accent to make them sound professional, stock footage. I hate those. The question is never really about goodness. It's about compliance. There is a lot of talk in this content about feminine essence, which sounds great until you hear their definition. Soft, sweet, naturally catering, apologizes a lot, needs constant reassurance. One video actually said, like a puppy. That is not essence. That's a checklist for somebody who won't push back. Feminine essence, in actual philosophical tradition, in Taoism, in depth psychology, in the frameworks that have been looking at human nature for centuries, means something completely different. Openness, intuition, depth, complexity, the ability to hold contradictions and remain whole. That is the opposite of compliance. My point, which I will just say plainly, is that what makes a good woman is exactly the same thing that makes a good man. Full stop. Here's what nobody in any of those videos mentioned. Those 4 Stoic virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. Women have been living those out their entire lives, same as men, just without anyone calling it that. Courage isn't just charging into battle. It's doing the right thing when it costs you something. It's negotiating from a place where you don't hold the formal power. When the relationship has to survive the outcome. When you can't afford to alienate. When you have to get to yes without anyone noticing that you were the one who actually got it there. Women have been doing that version of courage their entire lives. I would argue that we're better at it. Not because of anything biological, but because we have been practicing the harder version our entire lives. And for centuries, for that matter. Wisdom isn't credentials. It's knowing what matters and what doesn't. It's holding contradictions that aren't actually contradictions. Nurturing and ruthlessness, softness and tough, ambition and present, emotional and composed. Meeting impossible opposing requirements at the exact same time without losing yourself in the process. That's range. It's not contradiction. That is the complexity philosophy has been trying to describe for 2,500 years. Justice isn't a gavel. It's giving people what they're actually due. Telling the hard truth. Advocating for somebody who can't. Showing up when it costs you something and doing all of it while being the weaker sex. None of that is soft or uncomplicated. That is the Stoic definition of a good person, lived out loud, without the label. And here's what you get called for it. A man is decisive. A woman is bossy. A man is confident. A woman is aggressive. A man is passionate. A woman is emotional. A man builds an empire. A woman has ideas above her station. A man works hard and gets to the top. A woman clearly slept her way there. Same qualities, same virtues, 2 completely different reactions, totally depending on who's showing them. And this matters beyond just dating and marriage. When the dominant story tells men and women that a high-quality woman is one who mirrors his beliefs, takes on his worldview, shifts her politics to match his, and gives up what she wanted her whole life because he doesn't want it, that's not a dating philosophy. That is a political one. And it has consequences. Real ones. You're watching some of them right now. And this isn't new. It's not a modern problem. It's not something that started with YouTube. Here's the thing about philosophy. It's never been about having the right answers. It's about asking better questions. Harder ones. The ones that don't resolve easily. And for about 2,500 years, the questions that keep coming up in Athens, in Rome, in living rooms, backyards, and any place anybody sits quietly long enough to think, are these. What does it mean to have a good life? What does it mean to be a good person? Not a good man, not a good woman, a good person. The philosophers who spent their lives on that question, most of them were men. And a fair number of them, when they actually worked through the logic, concluded that virtue, character, the capacity for wisdom and courage and justice, none of it is gendered. It's human. I mean, they didn't always live like that because of the times they lived in, but they believed it and they wrote it down. That is what matters. You want examples? I'll try to keep it brief. Socrates, Athens, roughly 400 BCE. The Stoic godfather, if you will. The man who essentially invented the Western philosophical tradition by walking around asking questions people found incredibly annoying. He was eventually executed for it, which probably tells you something about how much people love having their assumptions examined. Socrates believed that virtue was the same in men and women. Not similar, not adjacent, the same. Wisdom is wisdom. Courage is courage. Justice is justice. And here's the part that usually gets left out. Socrates credited women as some of his most important teachers. One woman, a priestess, taught him everything he understood about love and desire and what it means to pursue something worth pursuing. He specifically named her his teacher, in his own words. Another woman ran a philosophical circle in Athens that Socrates went to regularly. To learn. Not to teach, to learn. From a woman. But that part gets buried. Fast forward 500 years. Rome. Marcus Aurelius is emperor. Fighting wars on multiple fronts, dealing with the plague. And in the middle of all of that, he's writing in his journal. That journal became Meditations, probably the most widely read philosophy text in human history. Page 1, before anything else, he lists the people who shaped him and what he learned from each one. His father died when Marcus was 3. He barely knew him, but he credited him with integrity and manliness. Now, I think this part matters. Marcus was raised in a system where men held the paternal power over the household by default. That's just how it worked. Men were in charge, always, by law. And yet, what Marcus credits his grandfather with in Meditations is kind of modest. Good character, self-control. But what he credits his mother with is something else entirely. Reverence, generosity, simplicity, morality, and the inability not only to do wrong, but to even conceive of it. She shaped his moral compass in a system specifically designed to minimize her authority, and he still put her on page 1. Let that land. Her name was Domitia Lucilla, educated, ran her own business. It was a brick and tile factory that supplied materials for some of Rome's most famous buildings. She raised a future emperor. She shaped the moral character of one of the greatest philosophical minds in recorded history. Marcus credited her on page 1 in the book that everyone reads and quotes. We just somehow forget to mention her. Now, I'm going to introduce you to somebody you've probably never heard of. Most people haven't. And that's kind of the point here. His name is Musonius Rufus. Some scholars call him the Roman Socrates. He was a Stoic philosopher who lived a generation before Marcus Aurelius. Specifically, he was the teacher of Epictetus, whose writings Marcus read obsessively and credited with basically shaping how he thought. Rufus was, essentially, Marcus's philosophical grandfather. And Musonius Rufus wrote, in plain language, 2,000 years ago, why should men seek to examine how to live well, to practice philosophy, but not women? Women are no less capable of wisdom, courage, and justice. The capacity for virtue is identical. He didn't whisper it. He wrote it down, and he taught it 2,000 years ago. Yet, you've never heard of him. Now, I'm going to jump onto somebody more current, whose ideas got the same treatment she was describing. Simone de Beauvoir, French philosopher, mid-20th century. She worked alongside the most celebrated philosophers of her time, the names everybody knows, the ones that get taught in the universities. She was their intellectual equal. In some cases, probably their better. In 1949, she published a book called The Second Sex. The argument was pretty simple. Women aren't born into a role, they're conditioned into one. the expectations, the limitations, the definitions of what a good woman looks like. None of it is natural. It's constructed, taught, reinforced until it feels like the air we breathe. Men got so mad they threw the book across rooms. Newspapers made fun of her. The Catholic Church banned it. One of her famous colleagues, a man who built his entire career on the absurdity of the human condition, was furious that she'd ridiculed the French male. The irony of a philosopher who championed human freedom being angry at the woman who used hers apparently totally escaped him. She is considered one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century. I first heard of her in a women's psychology course in college, not in a philosophy class. She showed up in my women's psych. She's on the women's studies shelf, not the philosophy shelf, the women's studies shelf. And that is the whole problem right there in one example. You want a more recent one? Hidden Figures. Now, I know this isn't philosophy, but it's the same pattern, and I can't not mention it. 3 black women, mathematicians, doing calculations that made space travel possible, doing the actual intellectual work. And for years, history filed them as footnotes. We found out because somebody made a movie about it 60 years later. Demisha Lucilla, the woman who taught Socrates, Simone de Beauvoir, the mathematicians at NASA, and countless women over the course of history we just don't have the time to talk about. All incredibly good women, right? But by the standards that I saw, they're not. They're red flags, high maintenance. Sit with that for a second. So let's talk about what a good person actually looks like. The philosophical version, the one with 2,500 years of receipts behind it. Wise enough to know what matters and what doesn't. Just enough to give people what they're actually due. Courageous enough to do the right thing when it costs something. Temperate enough to know the difference between what you want right now and what actually matters. That's the list, the whole list. I know women who clear every bar on that list while at the same time being told they are too much, too ambitious, too complicated, too difficult. The Stoics knew that. Socrates knew it. Marcus learned it from his mom. I get it. The lists in those videos are seductive. They promise clarity. They follow the rules, avoid these red flags, become this version of yourself, and everything works out. But it doesn't. You cannot sustain being someone you're not. Not long term, not in a relationship, not in life. The only version of you that's going to hold up over time is the actual one. And that applies to men too, by the way. Nobody wins by pretending. So, if being soft and compliant and building one man up is genuinely who you are, not someone you're told to be, not who you think you're supposed to be, but actually you, then good. More power to you. Nobody's business but yours. The problem was never the choice. The problem is when it stops being a choice. And for what it's worth, building up your partner goes both ways. Always has. And women, the same system that tells men that women are simple creatures tells us that other women are competition. We're not. Tearing each other down for not fitting the list serves nobody, least of all us. You want to know what actually makes a good relationship? Find somebody who makes you happy about, 80% of the time. That's it. That's the whole standard. Nobody makes anyone happy all the time. Anybody who's telling you otherwise is either delusional or lying. What makes a good woman is exactly the same thing that makes a good man, a good person. Now, clearly, I'm not a good woman, not by the definitions I've been watching, and I am pretty proud of that, actually. I'm the woman who, when she got married, had the priest remove obey from my vows. Fun fact, it's not in the men's vows, never has been. I also had him introduce us as Mike and Rachel, not Mr. and Mrs. Mike. I didn't do it because I thought of myself as a feminist. I did it because I'd spent years being introduced as somebody else, the baby of the family, somebody's little sister, somebody's daughter, something else. I wasn't going into my marriage losing my name on top of everything else. My mother was appalled. My husband just shook his head and smirked. The priest was amused. I really have no intention of being a good woman by the standards in the videos I've watched. I have every interest in being a good person, which is a much older, much harder standard that was never supposed to be gendered in the first place. Now, the important question that I'm going to leave you with is, are you a good person? Truly one. Wisdom, justice, courage, temperance. That's really all you need to concern yourself with. The rest is just bullshit. Thanks for watching. Take care of you, and Reggie and I will see you the next time. Bye-bye.